Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, How to Talk in Your Brain. Many English learners think they need a speaking partner to improve. They wait for a friend, they wait for an English class, they wait for the right opportunity. But there is something they forget. Your brain is always active. You are thinking while walking. You are thinking while eating. You are thinking while working. You are thinking before you sleep. So why not use those thoughts to practice English? This is called thinking in English, and it can become one of the most powerful habits for improving your speaking skills. Consider a young man named Mason. Mason had studied English for several years. He understood movies. He could read English articles. He knew many useful words. But when he tried to speak, he became slow. His problem was not a lack of knowledge. His problem was the way his brain processed English. When he wanted to say something, his brain followed 3 steps. First, he thought in his native language. Then he translated the idea into English. Finally, he tried to speak. This took too much time. One day, his friend Daniel noticed the problem. "You understand English very well," Daniel said. "So why don't you speak naturally?" Mason replied. "Because I translate everything in my head." Daniel smiled. "Then stop translating." Mason looked confused. "How? Start talking to yourself in English." "But I can't speak English all day." "You don't have to. Talk inside your brain." That idea sounded strange to Mason, but he decided to try. The next morning, while lying in bed, he started thinking in English. "I need to get up." Then another thought came. "I have work today." He walked to the bathroom. "I need to brush my teeth." Then he looked outside. The weather looks nice. The thoughts were simple, but Mason was doing something important. He was creating a direct connection between his thoughts and English. He wasn't translating. He wasn't searching for difficult vocabulary. He was simply using English to describe his life. During breakfast, he continued, "I'm hungry. I need some coffee. This coffee is hot. On the way to work. The road is busy today. I need to arrive on time. I have a meeting this morning." Mason soon discovered that ordinary life provided thousands of opportunities to practice. He didn't need a textbook. He didn't need an app. He didn't need to sit at a desk. His own brain was enough. But there was one problem. Sometimes he didn't know the English word for something. At first, he became frustrated. Then he remembered Daniel's advice. Don't stop your thought. Find an easier way to express it. That simple idea changed everything. Mason realized that thinking in English wasn't about knowing every English word. It was about learning to keep your thoughts moving. And this was only the beginning. Because once Mason learned how to create simple thoughts in English, he needed to learn how to make those thoughts longer, clearer, and more natural. Chapter 2. Start with simple thoughts. The next morning, Mason decided to continue his new habit. Before getting out of bed, he looked around his room and began thinking in English. My alarm is ringing. I need to get up. I'm still tired. I have work today. These thoughts were very simple, but Mason remembered something important. He didn't need difficult English. He needed natural English. His goal was to make English the language of his everyday thoughts. He got out of bed and walked toward the bathroom. I need to brush my teeth. Where is my toothbrush? Here it is. While looking in the mirror, he thought, I look tired today. Then he smiled. But I'll feel better after breakfast. Mason noticed something interesting. The more he used simple English thoughts, the easier they became. He didn't have to stop and translate. The English sentence appeared almost automatically. After getting dressed, he walked into the kitchen. What should I eat? He looked inside the refrigerator. There are some eggs. I could make an omelet. Then, another thought appeared. Actually, I don't have much time. I'll just have some toast. This was exactly the kind of practice Mason needed. He wasn't memorizing sentences. He was creating them according to his situation. That's an important difference. When you memorize a sentence, you may remember it for a while. But when you create a sentence from your own thoughts, your brain learns how to produce English. Mason continued his practice while leaving home. I need my keys. Where did I put them? He searched the table. They're not here. He checked his jacket. There they are. He laughed quietly. I almost forgot them. On the way to work, he looked around. The weather is beautiful. There are many people outside. That bus is crowded. I hope traffic isn't too bad today. Mason realized that he could turn almost anything he saw into English practice. A car, a building, a person walking, the weather, a phone call, a meal, even a simple thought about his plans. Everything could become English. Later that morning, Mason had a small problem. He wanted to describe something he saw on the street, but he couldn't remember one particular English word. For a moment, his mind stopped. Then he remembered the rule. Don't translate. Don't panic. Keep the thought moving. Instead of searching for the exact word, he described it differently. He thought, it's a small place where people buy coffee. He knew the exact word was cafe, but it didn't matter. He had successfully expressed the idea. This taught Mason an important lesson. Fluent speakers don't always use perfect words. Sometimes they explain. Sometimes they use simpler words. Sometimes they change the sentence. The important thing is communication. That evening, Mason practiced again. But this time, he added questions. What did I do today? I went to work and finished an important project. What was difficult? The meeting was difficult because I had to explain my idea. What will I do tomorrow? I'll finish the remaining work and meet Daniel after lunch. Now his thoughts were becoming longer. He wasn't just naming things. He was explaining them. He was asking questions. He was giving answers. He was creating small conversations inside his mind. And Mason was beginning to discover something powerful. Your brain doesn't need a classroom to practice English. It needs a reason to use English. But there was still another challenge. Simple thoughts were becoming easy. Now Mason needed to learn how to think in English when he had strong opinions, emotions, memories, and complicated ideas. That would push his brain to a completely new level. Chapter 3. Think beyond simple sentences. The next morning, Mason continued his English thinking practice. Simple sentences were becoming easier now. He could think, I need coffee. I'm going to work. The weather is cold. But he wanted to go further. He wanted to express his real thoughts, feelings, opinions, and memories in English. So he decided to challenge himself. While walking to work, Mason asked himself, what do I think about my job? At first, his mind was quiet. Then he slowly began thinking, I like my job because I work with good people. Sometimes it's stressful, but I think I'm learning a lot, he continued. In the future, I'd like to have more responsibility. Mason smiled. This was different. He wasn't describing something he could see. He was expressing an opinion. That was exactly what he needed. Your brain must learn to use English for more than basic information. You need English for your ideas. You need English for your feelings. You need English for your memories. And you need English for your plans. Mason decided to practice all four. First, he talked about his feelings. I'm a little tired today. I'm excited about the weekend. I'm worried about my meeting. I feel more confident than I did last month. Then he practiced memories. He thought about his childhood. When I was young, I used to visit my grandparents. Their house was near a small lake. I remember playing outside with my cousins. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. Mason noticed that memories were harder to express. He had to use different tenses. He had to connect several ideas, but that was good. His brain was getting stronger. Next, he talked about his future. I want to improve my English this year. I'd like to travel more. Maybe I'll visit London one day. I want to speak confidently with people from different countries. He wasn't worried about making every sentence perfect. He was focused on keeping his thoughts moving. Then Mason tried something even more difficult. He chose a topic and gave himself an opinion. His topic was social media. He thought, I think social media can be useful. It helps people stay connected. But I also think people spend too much time on it. Sometimes it can make people compare their lives with others. I believe we should use it carefully. Mason stopped walking. He was surprised. He had just explained a fairly complicated opinion entirely in English. A few months earlier, he would have translated every sentence. Now he was thinking directly. That was a major change. But Mason discovered another important technique. Whenever he had a thought in his native language, he didn't immediately translate the entire sentence. Instead, he asked himself, how can I say this idea using simple English? This question made everything easier. For example, he wanted to express a complicated idea about success. Instead of searching for difficult vocabulary, he thought, success is not only about money. I think being happy is also important. A person can have a lot of money and still feel unhappy. The English was simple, but the idea was meaningful. And that is exactly how you should train your brain. Don't make your English complicated just to sound intelligent. Make your English clear. Mason continued this exercise every evening. He chose one topic. Then he spent 5 minutes thinking about it in English. Sometimes the topic was easy. Sometimes it was difficult. But every day, he became better at expressing himself. Then one evening, Daniel called him. How is your English thinking practice going? Mason replied. It's getting easier. Can you think about complicated things now? Mason smiled. I can try. Daniel asked. What do you think makes someone successful? Mason paused for only a second. Then he answered, I think success depends on what you want from life. For some people, it's money. For others, it's family, freedom, or helping people. Personally, I think success means becoming better while enjoying your life. Daniel laughed. That was a great answer. Mason realized something. He wasn't preparing an answer. He wasn't translating. He was simply thinking, and then speaking. But there was still one important skill missing. Mason could think in English when everything was calm. What would happen when he was under pressure? What if someone asked him a question unexpectedly? What if the conversation moved quickly? He needed to train his brain to think in English faster and automatically. And that would become his next challenge. Chapter 4. Make English thinking automatic. The next morning, Mason decided to make his English thinking practice more challenging. He already knew how to describe his day. He could express his opinions. He could talk about his memories and future plans. But there was one question he still couldn't answer. Could he think in English when he had to respond quickly? That morning, he decided to find out. While preparing breakfast, he gave himself a simple challenge. He would think of a question and answer it immediately. What am I doing? I'm making breakfast. Why am I making breakfast? Because I'm hungry. What will I do after breakfast? I'll get ready for work. What do I need before leaving? I need my phone, keys, and wallet. Mason didn't give himself time to translate. He simply answered. Then he made the questions harder. What would I do if I didn't have to work today? Mason paused for a moment. Then his mind responded. I'd probably go for a long walk. Maybe I'd visit Daniel and have lunch with him. If the weather stayed nice, we could sit outside and talk. Mason smiled. His brain was responding faster. This was exactly what he wanted. He continued the exercise while traveling to work. He looked at a bus and thought, where's that bus going? I think it's going toward the city center. Would I take that bus? Probably not. Walking is faster for me. Then he noticed a man running down the street. Why is he running? Maybe he's late for work. Mason laughed. He realized that almost anything could become English practice. He didn't need to force himself to study. He simply turned his thoughts into English. But there was another powerful technique he wanted to try. He called it the English-only zone. For 15 minutes every day, Mason would allow himself to think only in English. No translating, no switching languages. If he didn't know a word, he would describe it differently. If he couldn't form a complicated sentence, he would make it simpler. The first few days were difficult. Sometimes his mind automatically returned to his native language. Whenever that happened, Mason noticed it and gently returned to English. He didn't become frustrated. He simply continued. After 2 weeks, something strange happened. Mason was walking home after work when he realized he had been thinking in English for almost 20 minutes. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't forced it. It was happening naturally. He thought about his work, then his dinner, then his plans for the weekend, then something Daniel had said earlier that day. All of it was happening in English. Mason stopped walking. He smiled. English was becoming a natural part of his inner voice. That evening, he called Daniel. I think something has changed. What happened? I don't always notice when I'm thinking in English anymore. Daniel laughed. That's exactly what we wanted. Mason continued. Sometimes an English sentence appears before I even think about my native language. That's a huge improvement. Daniel then gave him another challenge. Tomorrow, I want you to practice thinking in English during a real conversation. Mason became nervous. What if I can't respond quickly? That's why we're practicing. The next day, Mason met Daniel at a cafe. Daniel started asking unexpected questions. What do you think about working from home? Mason answered immediately. I think it has advantages because people can save time and work comfortably. But I also think it can become difficult if someone doesn't have a good routine. Daniel asked another question. Would you rather live in a big city or a small town? Mason answered, I'd probably choose a small town. I like quiet places, but I still want to be close enough to a city. Another question came. What is one thing you want to change about yourself? Mason paused for only a moment. I want to become more confident when speaking in front of people. Daniel smiled. You didn't translate those answers. Mason laughed. I didn't even think about it. That was the moment Mason understood something important. Thinking in English isn't about forcing English into every thought. It's about practicing enough that English becomes one of the natural ways your brain processes information. You start with simple thoughts. Then you build longer ideas. Then you express opinions. Then you respond quickly. And eventually, English begins to feel less like a subject and more like a habit. But Mason's journey wasn't finished. He still needed to learn how to use this habit every day without becoming bored or losing motivation. He needed a simple routine that could keep his English brain active for months and years. And that final routine would turn everything he had learned into a permanent habit. Chapter 5. Build your daily English brain routine. The next morning, Mason woke up with one question in his mind. How can I keep this habit going every day? He had already discovered that thinking in English could change the way his brain processed the language. But he also knew something important. A good habit only works when you continue it. So Mason decided to create a simple daily routine. He didn't want to spend hours studying English. He wanted something realistic, something he could follow even on busy days. He divided his day into 4 small English thinking sessions. The first session was in the morning. As soon as he woke up, he spent 5 minutes thinking in English. He described his plans. I need to get ready. I have work today. I need to finish an important task. Then he asked himself, what do I want to accomplish today? He answered, I want to finish my work early and have some time to relax. This simple morning exercise prepared his brain for English before the day even began. The second session happened during his daily activities. Mason didn't set aside special time for this. He simply used the moments he already had. While walking, he thought about what he saw. While eating, he described his food. While working, he explained his tasks. While traveling, he thought about where he was going. This helped English become connected to real experiences. The third session happened during his afternoon break. Mason spent 5 minutes choosing one topic. Sometimes he talked about his favorite movie. Sometimes he thought about his goals. Sometimes he explained an opinion. Sometimes he remembered something from his childhood. He asked himself questions and answered them. What makes me happy? What do I want to improve? What was the best part of my week? What would I do if I had more free time? The final session happened before bed. Mason reviewed his day in English. He thought, today was busy. I finished my main project. I had a good conversation with Daniel. I learned something new. Tomorrow, I need to wake up early. This final exercise helped him connect English with his memories. After following this routine for several weeks, Mason noticed something remarkable. He was no longer thinking about English practice all the time. He was simply living parts of his day in English. One evening, Daniel asked him, "How long do you practice English every day?" Mason thought about it. "I'm not sure." Daniel laughed. "How can you not know?" "Because I don't really feel like I'm practicing anymore." That answer made Daniel smile. It was the result they had been working toward. Mason had stopped seeing English as something he had to sit down and study. English had become part of his daily thinking. But Mason still had one important problem. Sometimes he had a bad day. Sometimes he felt tired. Sometimes he didn't want to practice. And that was when he learned another important lesson. Consistency is more important than motivation. You won't feel motivated every day. You don't need to. On difficult days, Mason reduced his practice. Instead of 15 minutes, he practiced for 2 minutes. Instead of discussing a complicated topic, he simply described what he was doing. I'm tired today. I need some rest. Tomorrow will be better. Even those few sentences kept the habit alive. Mason realized that missing one day wasn't the real problem. The real problem was giving up completely. So he made himself a promise. Even on my worst day, I'll give English a few minutes. Months passed. Mason's English continued improving. His vocabulary grew naturally. His sentences became faster. His confidence increased. And most importantly, his brain became comfortable using English. But there was still one final step. Mason needed to take everything he had learned and use it in the real world. Because thinking in English is powerful. But the ultimate goal is to communicate with real people. And Mason was about to have his biggest English conversation yet. Chapter 6. Take your English into the real world. A few months had passed since Mason began talking to himself in English. His morning thoughts were in English. His daily plans were in English. His opinions, memories, and future goals were becoming easier to express. But Mason knew something important. Thinking in English was not the final goal. The final goal was to use those thoughts when talking to real people. One Saturday morning, Daniel called Mason. "Are you free today?" "Yes. Why?" "I want you to come with me to the city." "What are we doing?" "We're meeting some people from different countries. It will be a good chance for you to practice." Mason became nervous. He had practiced alone for months. He had spoken with Daniel. But this would be different. There would be several people. They might speak quickly. They might use unfamiliar words. Mason almost wanted to cancel. Then he remembered everything he had learned. Don't wait until you're perfect. So he agreed. That afternoon, Mason and Daniel arrived at a small cafe. Several people were already sitting around a table. Daniel introduced Mason to everyone. One of them smiled and asked, "Hi, Mason. Where are you from?" Mason answered naturally, "I'm from England. What about you?" The conversation continued. Someone asked him about his work. Another person asked about his hobbies. Someone else wanted to know which countries he wanted to visit. Mason answered each question. Sometimes he spoke slowly. Sometimes he made a grammar mistake, but he didn't panic. If he didn't understand something, he simply said, "Sorry, could you say that again?" And the conversation continued. After about 20 minutes, Mason noticed something. He wasn't thinking about grammar. He wasn't translating every sentence. He was simply listening and responding. His brain was doing exactly what he had trained it to do. At one point, someone asked, "What do you think is the hardest part of learning English?" Mason smiled. "I think the hardest part is being afraid of making mistakes." Everyone became quiet for a moment. Mason continued. "When I started learning English, I thought I needed perfect grammar before I could speak. But then I realized that speaking is how you improve. You have to use the language before you feel completely ready." Daniel looked at him proudly. Mason had just explained one of his biggest lessons in English, and he had done it naturally. On the way home, Daniel asked, "How do you feel?" Mason smiled. "I feel different." "Different how?" "I used to think that fluent speakers had something special in their brains." Daniel laughed. "And now?" "Now I understand that they simply use English often." Daniel nodded. Exactly. Mason thought about his journey. It had started with one simple thought: "I need to get up." Then came simple descriptions, then questions, then opinions, then memories, then conversations, and finally, real communication. Mason realized that learning English wasn't about suddenly becoming fluent. It was about building hundreds of small habits. One thought, one sentence, one conversation, one day at a time. That evening, Mason sat quietly before going to bed. He thought about everything he had learned. I don't need to know every word. I don't need perfect grammar. I don't need to translate everything. I just need to keep communicating. Then he smiled. He understood the real secret. Your brain becomes comfortable with the language you use repeatedly. If you constantly translate, your brain becomes better at translating. If you constantly think in your native language and only study English occasionally, English remains something separate. But if you begin using English inside your daily thoughts, English slowly becomes natural. So, start today. When you wake up, think in English. When you walk, describe what you see. When you eat, describe what you're doing. When you have an opinion, express it in English. When you remember something, tell the story in English. When you make plans, think about them in English. And when you make mistakes, don't stop. Keep going. You don't need to change your entire life to improve your English. You only need to change the language you use during small moments of your day. Because one day, something beautiful will happen. You'll have an English thought, and you won't realize that you're thinking in English. You'll answer a question without translating first. You'll have a conversation without worrying about every grammar rule. And you'll finally understand. You didn't suddenly become fluent. You trained your brain until English became natural. So don't wait for the perfect time. Start with one thought, then another, and another. Train your mind every day, and let English become a natural part of who you are.